The strange part isn't that she cried. It's that she looked at me like I was a ghost, like I died years ago and showed up in the one place she never expected, wearing a name tag and sipping bad coffee under fluorescent lights. I never planned to go to that corporate networking event. I almost turned my car around twice. I even sat in the parking garage for 12 full minutes with the engine running, listening to a voicemail from my mother that I'd already heard 3 times. I didn't want to see anyone. Not after everything. Not after what happened between us. My name's Byron. I used to be somebody, or at least I thought I was. Back then, I managed operations at a medical logistics firm. These days, I fix printers at an office supply store and take long walks after dark so I don't think too much. I'm 39, childless, and still wake up some mornings reaching for the woman who left me like I was a post-it note stuck to her past. Her name was Raylan. You don't hear that name much. It suited her part Southern charm, part wildfire. I met her at a blood drive orientation. She was there for PR, smiling for the board members. I was there because someone from HR said it would boost morale. We clicked instantly. She laughed at my awkward jokes. I told her I was allergic to compliments, and she told me I looked like the kind of guy who still owned a flip phone. I didn't, but I liked that she thought I might. We were married 13 months later. The first year? Perfect. Not Hollywood perfect, real perfect. Burnt lasagna and spontaneous road trips. We get in fights about dishes and then make up over takeout and reruns of old sitcoms. She was the kind of person who could yell at you and hug you in the same breath. But then things started changing. She started staying late at the office more often. Claimed she was helping a colleague prepare for a presentation. His name was Shane. I still remember the first time she said it casually, like he was just a harmless part of her day. Shane this, Shane that. I started hearing his name more than mine. I told myself not to be paranoid. I wanted to trust her. I needed to. One Friday night, she came home at 11:45 p.m. No text. No missed call. Makeup slightly smudged. When I asked if everything was okay, she said, "Don't start with the questions. I'm tired, Byron." That was the first night I slept on the couch. What followed wasn't one big explosion. It was a slow undoing, like watching your favorite sweater unravel thread by thread. Her laughter felt rehearsed. Her kisses were quick, and our conversations turned into calendars and logistics. I knew something was off, but instead of confronting her, I kept trying harder. I bought flowers. I cooked dinner. I cleaned the entire apartment one Saturday and left her a note that said, "I love you more than you love your job." She didn't mention the note. Not once. One night, I found a hotel receipt in the laundry. The name on the guest check-in? Shane Carter. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just sat on the floor of our laundry room and stared at the little piece of paper that said everything her lips never would. When I finally asked her, she didn't even lie. She just looked at me, shrugged, and said, "I'm not happy anymore. You make me feel small." Small. That word stuck. Like gum on a shoe you can't quite scrape off. She packed a single suitcase and left that night. No drama. No tears. Just silence. She moved out. Got promoted. Married Shane less than a year later. I saw it on LinkedIn. That's how I learned she changed her last name back, then changed it again. And I vanished. I deleted every photo. I cut ties with mutual friends. I moved 73 miles away to a town nobody could pronounce on the first try. I started over, or at least pretended to. But when that corporate invite showed up in my inbox, the one with a fancy logo and words like reconnect and industry peers, something inside me said, go. Not to prove anything. Not to win. Just to exist. To remind myself I still could. I never expected her to be there. But she was. 3 years, 2 name changes, and 1 promotion later, she walked into the room with her husband on her arm. But when she saw me, her whole body stopped. Her mouth opened just slightly. Her eyes widened. And then, they filled. Raylan, the woman who once walked out on me without a blink, now stood 30 feet away with tears streaming down her cheeks. And all I did was nod. Not a word. Not a smile. Just a quiet nod, because I knew that for the first time since she left, the silence wasn't mine anymore. I don't know how long we just stood there. Me with my hands in my pockets, her frozen in place, mascara already betraying her. Shane leaned in and whispered something to her, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring at me like I was something ancient and sacred, or maybe something she buried that had clawed its way back out. I didn't move. I couldn't. My breath caught in that moment, not from love or hate, but from the overwhelming weight of finally being seen again, not as who I was, but as the version of me she created in her absence. The kind of seeing that happens when someone realizes too late that they were wrong. She slowly stepped away from him, just a few feet, like she didn't even notice her own legs doing it. And then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Byron?" Not a hi, not a how are you, just my name, like saying it alone was enough to collapse the world around her. And in that instant, every memory I had spent 3 years pushing down came rushing back like water through a cracked dam. Her laughter during thunderstorms. The way she used to hum off-key while brushing her teeth. Her voice calling me B when she wanted something, or Byron when she wanted to hurt me. I blinked and looked away first. I wish I could say it was strength, but it wasn't. It was a shield. A quiet, desperate defense. I turned toward the table with the cheap wine and name cards and grabbed one at random. Pretended to study it. My hands were trembling, and I prayed no one noticed. When I turned back around, she was closer. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice already cracking. I should have said no. I should have walked away like she once did. But I didn't. I'm not built that way. Even after everything, even after the silence, the infidelity, the cold exit, something inside me still needed to understand. I nodded slowly and gestured toward the hallway outside the main room. We walked in silence. I could feel her eyes on me the entire time. I refused to look back. We stopped beside the elevators. The hallway was mostly empty, just the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional laugh from inside the ballroom. "I didn't think you'd be here," she said finally. Her arms were crossed like she was cold, or like she was trying to hold herself together. "I wasn't going to come," I replied. "Didn't think it was my kind of crowd anymore." She smiled faintly, the way someone does when they're forcing it through pain. "You look different." "I am." She bit her lip, looked down, then back at me. I don't know how to start this. I've replayed this moment in my head so many times. What I'd say if I ever saw you again. What I'd do. And I asked quietly. I never imagined I'd cry. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She stepped a little closer. I thought I made the right decision back then. I really did. Shay made me feel seen, important. And I thought you were too comfortable, too quiet. I thought you'd never leave me no matter what I did, and that scared me. I convinced myself I needed more. I looked at her. For the first time that night, I looked into her eyes without flinching. "And did you find it?" "More." She didn't answer right away. Just stood there, mouth slightly open like the truth was trying to escape but didn't know if it was safe. I found busy days and lonely nights. I found compliments that meant nothing and touches that felt like negotiations. I found a version of myself that knew how to smile at strangers but forgot how to laugh alone. I found guilt. Byron, I found guilt. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream could have been. I let it settle before I spoke. "You told me I made you feel small." She winced. "I know. And for 3 years, I believed you. I thought I was the reason. I rewrote every memory, every fight, every look, trying to find the moment I failed." Tears welled again in her eyes. "You didn't fail." "I did." I took a breath. "Maybe. But I'll let you go without asking you to stay. That's on me." She shook her head furiously. "You were the only one who ever really saw me. And I broke that. I shattered it. I wanted to tell her it was okay. That she was forgiven. That time had healed me. But none of that was true. The truth was, I hadn't moved on. I just moved elsewhere. And healing? It wasn't some magical place you arrive at. It's a long, lonely road you walk alone, hoping that someday you'll forget why you started." The elevator dinged. She looked at it, then back at me. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. And that I never forgot you. Not once." I nodded. "That's something, at least." She stepped forward like she wanted to hug me. I gently took a step back. Not in anger. Not in resentment. Just in quiet self-preservation. She understood. "I hope you find someone who sees you the way you always saw me," she whispered. And then, without waiting for my reply, she walked into the elevator, leaving the door to the past cracked open, but not wide enough for either of us to crawl back through. After the elevator doors closed, I didn't move for a while. Just stood there, listening to the hum of the overhead lights and the muted laughter from the event room down the hall. Everything in that moment felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's memory, one I wasn't meant to be part of. I should have left, slipped out quietly and driven back to my apartment where no one waited up and the TV remote was the only thing that asked questions. But I didn't. I walked back into the ballroom. I don't know why, maybe because I wanted to prove something to myself. Maybe because I didn't want her to think she still had the power to knock me off balance, even though she clearly did. The room hadn't changed. People were laughing, networking, trading business cards. Nobody noticed what had just happened outside those walls. Nobody saw the man who had quietly bled out 3 years of pain in a hallway while the world kept spinning. I found the nearest chair and sat down. My name tag had fallen off earlier, so now I was just a man in a second-hand blazer, invisible again, which, oddly, felt like relief. Then someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned, expecting a server or someone asking if I dropped something. But it was her again. Raylan. Alone. No shame. Her eyes were red, but she had pulled herself back together the way women do, quick and precise, like damage control had become second nature. He left, she said softly. Told me to take the Uber. Said he didn't want to watch me fall apart in front of you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. She pulled the chair next to mine and sat down. Just like that. Two people who once shared a bed, now sharing a silence. It was surreal. Then she asked something I hadn't prepared for. Did you ever hate me? Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she was bracing for a wreck that had already happened. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And I realized I didn't see the woman I married anymore. I saw someone who had spent 3 years running from herself, and in finding me again, maybe hoped to borrow a bit of the man she once betrayed to remind herself who she used to be. No, I said, but I hated the version of me who let it happen, who ignored the signs, who thought loving you meant losing myself. She nodded slowly, eyes glossing again. I told myself you were too fragile, too passive, that you wouldn't fight for me. You weren't wrong, I replied. I didn't fight, but not because I didn't care, because I didn't think I deserved better. Her hand reached for mine, then stopped halfway. I made a mistake. I smiled faintly. You made a decision. The mistake was thinking I wouldn't survive it. We sat there in that ballroom, surrounded by polished shoes and clinking glasses, like two ghosts who wandered back to the wrong timeline. She eventually pulled a card from her purse, her business card, and slid it toward me. If you ever want to talk, she said. Or, just grab coffee. No pressure. I looked at the card. Her name. Her title. A direct number. Clean, corporate, distant. Like a resume version of a person I once knew deeply. I took it. Not because I wanted to call, but because part of me needed to hold the weight of her offer, the same way I once held the weight of her goodbye. She stood up, gave me one last look that said everything she couldn't, and walked away. This time, I didn't watch her go. I just sat there, eyes forward, still. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing the past. I was letting it walk away on its own. And that, I think, was the real goodbye. That night didn't end the way I thought it would. I didn't storm out dramatically. I didn't make some grand exit, hoping she'd chase after me. Instead, I stayed. I lingered among the sea of strangers and noise, sipping watered-down wine and pretending to listen to a presentation about logistics trends that would never affect me again. I watched people shake hands and laugh like they were sealing fates with each chuckle. But I wasn't really there anymore. Part of me had already slipped into a different place, a different version of the night, one where I didn't sit alone clutching the name card of a woman who once tore out my heart so cleanly that it hardly even bled until she was gone. I stared at that stupid business card until the ink blurred from the sweat on my palm. I knew I wouldn't call her. I knew it the second she placed it down like some fragile offering. But part of me, the broken boy who still lived quietly under the layers of a man I was trying to be, wanted to believe that closure looked like coffee and polite conversation. I shoved the card deep into my pocket like it might burn a hole through my jacket if I didn't bury it fast enough. I left before dessert was served. Walked right past the dance floor where I once imagined twirling her around during our 10-year anniversary party. Funny how many futures we build on foundations that were never meant to hold the weight. The parking garage was colder than it had any right to be in spring. My breath came out in small clouds as I made my way to my car, an old silver Honda that groaned in protest every time I turned the key. It was the same car I had when Raylan and I were still us, back when small things like oil changes and gas station hot dogs felt like adventures instead of necessities. I sat behind the wheel for a long time without starting the engine. I thought about the night she left, how quiet the apartment had been once she closed the door, how I sat on the floor by the fridge, staring at the magnet we bought on our honeymoon, a cheap plastic heart that said, "Forever starts here." I remembered the weight of that silence, how it settled into the bones of the place until even breathing felt too loud. And now, 3 years later, she had walked back into my life like a question with no right answer. I pulled the business card out of my pocket, stared at it again under the flickering garage lights. And then, without ceremony, I tore it in half. And then in half again. And again. Tiny pieces of her name, her new identity, raining down onto the passenger seat like a confetti of things I no longer owed loyalty to. I didn't hate her. That was the strange part. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just tired. Tired of carrying a ghost that wasn't even mine to mourn anymore. When I finally drove out of that garage, it felt like the first real exhale I'd had in years. No more chasing closure. No more hoping for apologies dressed up in polite regrets. No more waiting for her to validate the pain she gave me permission to feel. I didn't need her coffee dates. I didn't need her explanations. What I needed was this: a quiet night, a steady engine, and the simple, powerful knowledge that I had survived the storm she brought, even if I still sometimes walked with a limp because of it. As the highway stretched out in front of me, endless and dark, I realized something else too. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own tires humming against the asphalt as you leave every version of yourself that used to beg for answers behind. And for the first time since Raylan closed that door, I didn't feel small. I felt vast. I felt unfinished. I felt free. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, the sky still painted in those fragile shades of almost daylight that make everything look softer, sadder. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I lay there in bed, expecting the familiar scent of her shampoo, the faint sound of a shower running, the way Raylan used to hum old country songs in the morning when she thought I was still asleep. But there was nothing, just the low hum of my ceiling fan and the weight of a too-big bed. I sat up slowly, feeling that familiar tug in my chest, that ache that wasn't sharp anymore, but dull, like a scar you forget about until the weather changes. I rubbed my hands over my face and stared at the cracks in the ceiling, wondering how many other men were waking up that morning thinking about women who had long since stopped thinking about them. It's a strange thing, mourning someone who's still alive, knowing they're out there, breathing, laughing, living, just not with you, not for you. And still, part of you carries a version of them around like a pressed flower in a forgotten book. I got dressed without thinking, throwing on the same jeans and flannel I always wore on Saturdays. I made coffee I didn't really want and left it steaming on the counter. I needed air, space, anything but the four walls that still whispered her name when the world got too quiet. I ended up at the lake, the same lake where Raylan and I used to go when we first started dating, back when we couldn't afford fancy dates and thought skipping rocks and sharing a half-melted ice cream counted as romance. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few early joggers and an old man feeding stale bread to indifferent ducks. I sat on a bench, pulling my jacket tighter against the early spring chill, and watched the water ripple under the soft touch of the wind. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, feeling the enormity of everything I had lost and everything I hadn't realized I still needed to let go of. I thought about that moment at the corporate event, how she looked at me like a woman seeing the consequences of her own choices for the first time. I thought about the apology she whispered in the dim hallway, the way her voice broke on the words. And for a second, I hated myself for still caring at all. Because no matter how far I ran, some part of me would always remember the way she used to look at me when I was the center of her world, before she decided that world wasn't enough. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. Her number wasn't there anymore. Deleted, erased, like it could undo the memories attached to it. But my fingers hovered over the contacts anyway, as if muscle memory could resurrect something dead. I thought about calling her, about telling her I forgave her, or that I hated her, or that I didn't know what I felt anymore. But then I thought about the man I had been 3 years ago, the man sitting in a dark apartment, begging the universe for one more chance to be loved by someone who had already decided he wasn't worth it. And I knew that man deserved better than this. He deserved peace, not recycled pain dressed up as closure. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and leaned back against the bench, closing my eyes against the rising sun. The past wasn't going to fix itself. She wasn't going to undo the leaving. And I wasn't going to get back the years I spent thinking love meant endurance. But maybe, just maybe, I could build something new out of the pieces she left behind. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And when that day came, I wouldn't be standing there waiting for her to notice me. I'd be somewhere she wouldn't even think to look. Somewhere she couldn't reach. Somewhere she no longer mattered. Because the hardest part about healing isn't forgiving them. It's forgiving yourself for all the time you spent waiting for an apology that was never going to be enough. Weeks passed after that night, and life resumed its steady, unimpressive rhythm. I went to work, smiled when necessary, nodded through conversations I wasn't really part of. I paid bills, replaced a broken porch light, bought groceries I mostly ended up throwing away. Life, when it's emptied of the people who once filled it, doesn't stop being life. It just becomes quieter, less colorful, like someone turned down the saturation on the world and you're the only one who notices. But somewhere inside that muted existence, I started rebuilding in tiny, almost invisible ways. I started taking evening walks again, longer than before. I stopped bringing my phone. I just listened to the way the wind played in the trees, the way the gravel crunched under my shoes. I started noticing things, the way the neighbor's kid always left one roller skate outside the door, the way the old woman at the corner house whistled off-key while watering her roses. I wasn't happy, not yet, but I was present. And sometimes, presence is a bigger miracle than joy. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic, the ones I promised myself I'd deal with years ago, I found it. A small, beat-up journal with a broken spine and pages falling out. It was mine. I had kept it back when Raylan and I were first married. I thumbed through it, expecting to feel gutted by whatever naive hopes were scribbled inside. But mostly, it was small things. Grocery lists that somehow turned into love letters halfway down the page. Half-finished poems about rainy Tuesdays. Sketches of the road trips we never took. And tucked between two pages, a photo wrinkled and faded, like a memory you can't quite bring into focus anymore. It was from our 3rd anniversary. We were at a cheap Italian place, smiling too wide, her lipstick smudged on the rim of her wine glass. My tie loosened like I was already tired of pretending I was more grown up than I really was. I stared at that photo for a long time. Long enough that the afternoon sun shifted through the attic window and painted golden stripes across the floorboards. I wasn't angry at the man in the picture. I didn't feel embarrassed by how much he loved her. I just felt compassion. He didn't know. He didn't deserve what was coming. And maybe that's the most heartbreaking thing about life. We love without knowing. We invest without guarantees. We trust without proof. And sometimes we lose without ever understanding why. I slid the photo back into the journal and placed it carefully into a new box, not to bury it, not to erase it, but to honor it. To honor the man I was, and the love I gave without apology, without expectation. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee gone cold and watched the stars bleed into the night sky. I thought about Raylan, about what she said, about what she didn't say. I wondered if she cried when she got home after that night at the corporate event. I wondered if she replayed our conversation in her head, twisting it around, trying to make it hurt less. Or if she just slipped back into the life she chose without missing a step. I'd never know. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need to. Healing isn't about getting answers. It's about asking better questions. About realizing that sometimes the why doesn't matter nearly as much as the what next. And as the night grew colder and the stars sharpened against the velvet sky, I made myself a quiet promise, not the kind you shout into the universe, but the kind you whisper into your own broken parts. I promised that the next time I gave my heart away, it wouldn't be to someone who saw it as an anchor. It would be to someone who saw it as a lighthouse. Someone who wanted to build something with me, not escape from it. And until then, I would keep building myself, piece by careful piece, in the quiet spaces she left behind. Life kept moving, whether I was ready for it or not. That's the funny thing no one tells you when you're shattered. Time doesn't wait for you to pick up the pieces. It just sweeps you along, broken or whole. I went back to work. I nodded through meetings about printer upgrades and paper discounts, my mind only half in the room. I drank coffee I didn't need and told myself it was just another day closer to feeling normal again, even though I wasn't sure what normal even looked like anymore. Sometimes, in the middle of restocking shelves or helping some kid pick out a stapler for college, I'd get flashes, not of her face exactly, but of moments. The way Raylan used to tuck her hair behind her ear when she was lying. The way she'd glance at her phone mid-conversation and think I didn't notice. The slow withdrawal of touch, the late nights explained by shallow excuses, the cold shoulders disguised as exhaustion. I had spent years convincing myself I was over it. That her betrayal was an old scar, numb and meaningless now. But grief doesn't leave cleanly. It hides in the corners, in the forgotten places, in the songs that shuffle onto the radio when you least expect it. I started carrying a small notebook with me everywhere, not because I had anything important to say, but because writing down the thoughts made them feel less heavy, less likely to consume me. I'd scribble things like, "Today I smiled at a stranger and meant it," or "Didn't think about her until after lunch." Victories, even if they were small. Especially because they were small. I didn't tell anyone about the night at the corporate event. Not my coworkers, not the few friends I still had, not even my sister who called once a week to make sure I hadn't turned into a complete hermit. It felt too raw, too personal. Like saying it out loud would break whatever fragile progress I had made in letting her go. Instead, I started doing little things that anchored me to the present. I repainted the walls in my living room a color she would have hated, a deep navy that made the space feel smaller but safer. I bought a new set of dishes, plain and simple, not the ornate ones we picked out together because she thought they made us look grown up. I replaced the old mattress, the one we shared for years, even though it nearly broke my bank account to do it. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because healing isn't just emotional. It's physical too. It's in the spaces you reclaim, the objects you replace, the memories you stop letting live rent-free in your home. One Saturday, I found myself wandering into a bookstore downtown, a dusty, cramped little place that smelled like paper and possibility. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just wanted to be somewhere that felt timeless, where old stories were kept alive without judgment. I ran my fingers along the spines of novels I would probably never read, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt curious. Alive. Like maybe the world still had things to offer me, even if it had taken so much already. That's when I met Eleanor. She worked there, tucked behind the counter with a cup of tea and glasses that kept slipping down her nose. She had the kind of smile that made you feel like you weren't interrupting something important, even if you obviously were. We talked about books, about coffee shops, about how spring never really arrives on time anymore. It wasn't flirting. Not really. It was just two strangers sharing a moment of easy connection. And maybe that's all it was ever meant to be. But as I left the bookstore with a used copy of a poetry collection I hadn't heard of before, I realized something. Healing doesn't announce itself with trumpets and banners. It doesn't feel like a lightning strike or a fireworks show. Healing feels like a quiet afternoon in a bookstore, talking to someone who doesn't know your scars and isn't trying to fix them. It feels like laughing at a joke you didn't see coming. Like breathing a little easier without realizing it. That night, when I got home, I opened the book to the first page. There, written in faint pencil, was a line that stopped me cold. There are some things you never move past. You just learn to carry them better. I closed the book and smiled for the first time all day. Because for once, I didn't feel broken by what I carried. I just felt strong enough to keep walking with it. Spring finally arrived, not with a bang, but in quiet ways. Warmer breezes sneaking through open windows. Trees shyly budding along cracked sidewalks. The kind of days where you find yourself smiling without realizing it, where the world seems a little less heavy, a little more possible. I kept going back to the bookstore, not out of desperation or loneliness, but because it became a place where the past couldn't find me. Eleanor and I became friends, real friends, the kind built on slow conversations and the understanding that broken things don't need fixing to be beautiful. We'd sit on the back patio after closing hours, sharing lukewarm coffee and stories that didn't always have neat endings. She never pried about my past. She didn't have to. There's a kindness in people who let you exist without needing an explanation. One evening, as the sunset dipped the sky into shades of molten gold, Eleanor handed me a small notebook. The cover was worn, the pages mostly blank. "For your victories," she said simply, smiling that same soft smile that had become strangely important to me. I opened it right there. On the first page, she had written one line in her messy, looping handwriting. "You are not what you lost. You are what you survived." I don't know why, but I felt something shift inside me then, something gentle, something forgiving. I realized that maybe life wasn't about getting back what was taken. Maybe it was about learning to love what was left. About planting seeds in the ruins and trusting that someday, something green would grow again. I started writing in that notebook every night. Not about Raylan. Not about Shane. Not about the betrayals and goodbyes and hollow spaces they left behind. I wrote about small victories, finishing a hard day at work, helping a customer with a real smile. Laughing until my sides hurt because Eleanor slipped and knocked over an entire shelf of mystery novels, and we both sat on the floor laughing like idiots for 10 full minutes. Healing didn't come in one grand moment. It came slowly, in layers. In the way I stopped checking her social media. In the way I no longer measured time by how long it had been since she left. In the way my heart didn't clench at the sight of spring flowers, the way it once did when she would drag me to farmers' markets just to smell them. One Saturday, Eleanor invited me to a small gathering at her place, just a few friends, a backyard strung with fairy lights, mismatched chairs, and too much homemade food. I almost said no. Old instincts die hard. But something inside me said, go. Live. And so, I did. That night wasn't magical in a movie kind of way. It was better. It was real. There was laughter and clumsy dancing and dogs weaving between our feet. At one point, I stood under the string lights, watching Eleanor spin slowly to some scratchy old love song playing through a half-broken speaker, and I realized something I hadn't dared to hope for. I wasn't waiting for Raylan to come back anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies or closure. I wasn't waiting for my life to start again. It already had. It was here, in this imperfect, beautiful moment, with these imperfect, beautiful people. I wasn't the man I used to be. I wasn't the man she left behind. I was something new, something rebuilt. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of hope. Quiet, steady, stubborn hope. And maybe that's the real victory. Not that you move on without scars, but that you carry them like medals. Proof that you loved, that you lost, and that you still chose to live anyway. As I stood there smiling under the stars, I thought about the boy I had been, the one who believed love had to hurt to be real, and I wanted to reach back through time, squeeze his shoulder, and tell him, you're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to be free. And somewhere, deep inside, I think he finally believed it too.